Daniel Mookhey, the Treasurer of New South Wales. Welcome into the weeds, mate.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for having me on to your amazing podcast.
That you're very, very welcome, of course. It's a real honour, especially this week.
Yeah.
You're a very busy man. You're a very serious and important man. You are the Treasurer of New South Wales. And last night you've had your budget pass the Parliament of New South Wales, your third budget. A lot of pressure. How are you dealing with it?
Well, it's always nice when the Parliament passes the budget, and it is budget week, and it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of effort, and it's a lot of strain, and a lot of pressure, and so I'm glad that it's done. Doing it third time around, you should be better at every job you do the third time you do it, and if you're not, I would suggest that perhaps you get a job in another political party. Is the way I put it, Jeremy.
Well, look, if you're ever looking for a place to go, mate, the Legalised Cannabis Party could do with a bit of economic literacy. It's not our speciality, mate. But look, we'll talk about the budget down the track. I want to talk about you and your family. You are the proud son of Indian migrants.
I am.
Came here in 1973 out of the Punjab.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating to read your inaugural speech, how important it was to you and your grandfather. You know, you were coming to Australia.
Yeah.
You mentioned him. And just as an anecdote, our grandfathers both fought in the British 8th Army against the fascist in North Africa.
Yes.
Montgomery's army. My grandfather was with the Red Devils.
Really?
Yeah. Fought in against Rommel. In the retreat from Benghazi and at the Battle of El Alamein.
Yeah, wow. I didn't know that. Your granddad was there.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Isn't it? They might have even, been in a trench together.
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that, Jeremy, because turns out my wife's granddad was also in Alamein.
Really?
As well. And so we've often discussed the fact that who knows whether or not the two of them interacted at the time. But yeah, I mean, Jeremy, my grandfather, he was born, it would have been in the 1918s, around that time as well. He was born in India. He was born in what's now Pakistan. And at the time, he lost his dad when he was 5, 6, around that age. And so he ended up joining the Indian Army, or the British Indian Army as it was known, when he was 14. He lied about his age. And he ended up as a paratrooper. And so he was jumping out of planes.
That's so weird. That's exactly the same as my grandfather.
Yeah. And so he was jumping out of planes, and he was deployed in the British Indian Army during the Second World War, and he was in North Africa. He was in Crete, predominantly Italy. I think there's the 3 big theatres that he was in the Second World War.
That's the same as my grandfather.
Yeah, probably that's what they were doing with. Frankly, that was where they were sending the colonial armies.
Yes.
And so the British Indian divisions and the Australian divisions were often sent to the same place. And Greece, I'd be shocked if your grandfather wasn't sent to Greece at some point.
Greece as well.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah, my grandfather was shot in Sicily in 1943, I think.
So my granddad was in El Alamein, and he ends up being with the Rats of Trabuk, because they famously became known. But he was very young. He must have been very young at that age. But he was in a division. And what happens is one of the German tanks collects everybody in his division except him, because he was in a trench and he was sleeping on the trench, and he's managed to survive. But then he ends up having to wander literally through the desert. I tell this story in the first speech, which I'm flattered that you read, but he ends up having to wander through the desert, and he keeps reciting to himself, or he's seeing visions, right, of, because water thirst, I presume. He keeps seeing visions of monkeys. And for a Hindu, that's actually quite significant, because Hanuman, the monkey god, and it's one of the things in our faith tradition we call the Hanuman Chalisa, which is the script of Hanuman, or it's a massive poem in honor of Hanuman, the monkey god, and who had a monkey army. And so he ends up walking through the desert, and he ends up finding, obviously he gets rescued, but for the rest of his life, he would start every day. He'd have his shower, and he would recite the Hanuman Chalisa from heart, from his memory, the entire thing, right? It's about 40 minutes. And he would do it every day, and you would not interrupt him. And I remember when I was visiting him when I was a very young child in India, and that's what he would do. And you knew not to interrupt him. But yeah, and so he ends up then staying in the army, and then India gets partitioned, or India and Pakistan get partitioned, which is when India and the subcontinent gets its independence, the British split the country. And the part of India that I'm from is the Punjab, is one of the major provinces which was split. And so my maternal grandfather and my paternal grandfather both end up having to move as refugees. My grandfather, because he was in the army, he was a part of, I guess, one of the only few institutions that was functioning at the time. So he ends up hosting 20, 30, 40 relatives, that in 1947, 1948. And India at the time, post-independence, very poor, recovering from pretty traumatic event. I mean, people don't know as much about the partition of the subcontinent as they do about other forms of conflict or history around the world. But it involves a mass movement of roughly 6 million people. It's one of the biggest mass movements in human history of people having to swap sides effectively and land. And so quite a tough time in which my parents were then born in India. And then my father and my mother, my father migrates to Australia in 1973. He gets an education, and he's one of eldest of four, and he gets educated. And at that time, that's no small feat, in India. And my mother gets educated, and that's no small feat, as do all my uncles and aunts, because fundamentally my grandfather was in the army and had access to the support, the pensions, the schemes, the education that you get as being an army family. And so they end up, my father comes to Australia just after Gough Whitlam abolishes the last remnants of the White Australia policy, welcomes people from the subcontinent. My father is trained as a geologist. He swaps northern India for outback South Australia in 1973, ends up in Sydney in 1975. I'm born in Blacktown here in the west of Sydney a few years after that. And my father passes away when I'm quite young as well. And then I end up in public schools, public hospitals. My mum's in a unionised workplace. We get through, and lo and behold, I find myself in Parliament and now the Treasurer of New South Wales.
You've just skipped through, mate, but you clearly come from a long line of people who are incredibly resilient, disciplined and committed, and survivors. It's clear that had a big impression on you from your inaugural speech, and so you do end up the son of a migrant family.
Yep.
In Western Sydney in the 1970s, going to public school. And you're not the smartest person in your family. Your sister outdid you at school. She was a bit cleverer than you.
Oh, no, not true. My sister she's 1 year and a bit older than me. And so we're very close. But my sister, no. I beat her in the HSC by 0.2.
Oh.
0.2.
How did you go? What did you get in the HSC?
I got about 98.
98.
Yeah,
you slacker.
I got very close to that. And she got a little bit less than that. And I remind her of that every day. But she did do better at university than I did because she paid a bit more attention and she did turn up a lot.
You only did 3 degrees.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
you slacker. You were clearly, you weren't pulling many cones and going to parties. You were pretty dedicated.
I was. I have to say I was a nerd, and I still am. I'm peak geek of New South Wales, as I've been described as by the Daily Telegraph this week.
Well, the nerds run the world, mate. Don't worry about that.
Hey, it's hip to be square.
Look, one of my favourite movies as a kid was Revenge of the Nerds, mate. I loved Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah.
Revenge of the Nerds 2. It's a classic. Do yourself a favour if you've ever seen that. But at school, again, your inaugural speech, it's pretty instructive. You were pretty political. You're an organiser, and a networker.
Yeah.
You mention about 400 people in your inaugural speech.
Yeah.
You don't miss out on anyone.
Yeah, that's true.
You're an organiser.
I'm a politician too.
You're a politician. You're a networker. Everyone got a mention. Where did that come from? Why did you feel the need to involve yourself in that discourse about how we run our society,
Yeah, well,
how we organise it. How did you get politicised?
I got politicised when Paul Keating lost. And I mean, I grew up basically in the
1996.
96, yeah. I was 14 at the time. And I grew up during the era of Bob Hawke and Paul Keating and John Hewson, John Howard. I vividly remember the 1993 election, and I remember the miracle election that Keating won, the victory for the true believers. And I remember watching it. I remember actually talking in Year 5 to my other staunch Labor friends at Hilltop Road Primary School. About
In Year 5.
Yeah, in Year 5, because we were all stayed up and watched Paul Keating win and claim victory at the Bankstown Sports Club. But when Mr. Keating lost, I noticed the nation changed. And what specifically provoked me to get quite involved in politics was when Pauline Hanson turns up on the scene and One Nation starts to rise as a force, and you start to notice the way in which that was handled was quite different. But actually what that was for me was a bit of a wake-up call about the type of values that I have. I mentioned to you already, Jeremy, that my father passed away when I was quite young. I was 5 years old, and I'm the youngest of 3 children. My mum's a widow. She was only in the country for 12 years. She managed to raise us because she had access to excellent public schools, and she had Medicare. And when the recession we had to have happened, she was in a unionised workplace. And so when the redundancies were going around, the union stepped in and made sure she kept her job. And that type of values came very much was how I grew up. And when Mr. Keating lost, I noticed that those values were at risk. And so it's my diplomatic way of saying that as a teenager, I got fired up. And I used to spend the best night. I had my favourite nights every year were 2 nights, right? It was State of Origin for the football and the budget night. And I used to read Peter Costello's budgets. I used to go to the Parliamentary Library and have a look at them. It was granted, I wasn't the hippest of teenagers, believe it or not. Wasn't as popular as you want. But I would turn up to my high school and I would preach about the evils of John Howard and Peter Costello. And I would tell people about how mean he was because he wasn't prepared to index something or he cut something else. And no one would talk to me after that for a while. But actually, I ran into Peter Costello. Must have been last year at an investment conference of some form. I went up to him. I said something to him like, "Teenage Daniel would hate adult Daniel, but yeah, I can see some of why you did what you did as well." So yeah, no, it was a nice opportunity to socially isolate myself at high school, to take a strong interest in politics.
Well, I think we're the better for it, mate, because you're now the Treasurer of New South Wales, and you've clearly set out a long way, a long time ago, and you've dedicated yourself to it. You got active. When did you join the Labor Party? Because you got active you were in the private sector for a while.
I wasn't allowed to join the Labor Party until I was 18. My mum wouldn't let me, but I started handing out for the Labor Party when I was 16 and campaigning in the 1998 election for Kim Beazley.
Kim Beazley?
Yep, I was handing out for Kim, and I was also campaigning, doing a bit of street stalls for the local Labor candidate in Parramatta in the 1998 election, and that's how I got involved. Yeah.
Fantastic. And you, when did you get involved with the union movement?
As soon as I got to uni. Yeah. So I
was it NTEU?
No, I was at TWU, Transport Workers Union.
At union?
Yeah. So I, as soon as I got to uni, I got involved in the Labor Club and joined the Labor Party, and I then signed myself up to do a union internship, Union Summer, as it was called. And it was a new program at the ACT, relatively new program at the ACTU had been rolling out with the unions to just get younger people involved in unions and to sort of show that what it is. So I ended up doing the Union Summer program, which was at the Transport Workers Union. And I should say, actually with the Deputy Premier, the now Deputy Premier of New South Wales, the two of us did our first Union Summer together, which meant that I was being flung out to the airport to talk to taxi drivers. I would then go out with one of the organisers to waste yards, tips, Garbos. Yeah, spending a lot of time with them. And then the next day you're out at the airport talking to kitchen staff who produce the food that are on the planes and the people who move the baggage. And you got a real love and flavour for it. And I got to say, as a person who was sort of a kid of an immigrant in high school, it was a really great way to learn and meet lots of different people at that point in time. And then I was in university. I was a student politician, of course, which is not a shock to lots of people who are heavily politicised when they're young. They end up gravitating to student politics. And then I became, then started working as a lawyer for the Transport Workers Union.
They're part of the right, aren't they?
They are, yeah. I mean, they're a great. I still am a member. I'm a very passionate supporter of theirs. But they are what you would describe as they would describe as quite a economically militant union, but with a real Catholic social justice ethos to them, which was always their tradition, and that still is the case, right? I mean, they represent some of the people who do some of the hardest work in the country and some of the most dangerous work in the country.
Truck drivers
is really, it's hard work. It's incredibly hard work, long hours, big fatigue. It's dangerous work. You're operating massive machinery at speed at night often. So it's a real education, and they are still and are masters of how to get justice for workers, change for their industry, and make an imprint on the nation as well. So I learned a lot from them.
Well, they've made an imprint on you. Yeah. You then end up with ACTU running a federal campaign down there. So
I did,
clearly people understood that you had a knack for organising and for politics.
Look, I left the TWU and then I spent a bit of time at a think tank doing a bit of writing per capita, a great institution that was set up really to give a good centre-left voice as to what should happen economically, socially as well. So that was a good time. And then I did go back to the ACTU in 2013 to run the ACTU's federal election campaign in that rather interesting year in which Julia Gillard started the year as Prime Minister, but Kevin Rudd was the person who ends up running for the Prime Ministership in September of that year, October of that year. Yeah.
So you spent some time, and I think you're famous certainly in Parliament, but I think more broadly because you've got on your wall a picture of Richard Nixon and Kennedy.
Yeah.
So
the two of them.
So
the three of them actually. I've got Bobby Kennedy.
You got Bobby.
I've got Jack Kennedy.
Yep.
And I've got a Richard Nixon poster too, and I have Dr. King and Malcolm X.
You've got them all,
as
mate.
well. Yeah.
The greats of 1960s American politics.
Yeah. People think I'm a Nixon fan, right? But Jeremy, I got to tell you a story. It's not true. Can I tell you the story?
Yeah, go for it, mate.
So,
explain yourself, mate. Richard Nixon.
It's funny because I'm going to explain yourself because all of a sudden these people think I'm a big Richard Nixon fan. So lots of people have given me Richard Nixon paraphernalia.
Oh,
really? One of the things which is like, I appreciate it. Don't get me wrong, right? Don't get me wrong at all. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of US history in general. But anyway, mate, like the truth is, I must have been 23, 24. I was with my girlfriend, now my wife. She lived in Glebe. We went to the Glebe markets, walking through the Glebe markets, just having a look at what's around, go to a stall, flicking through it. There's these three posters. Two of them are of the Kennedys, right? And I'm a huge Kennedy fan, particularly Bobby Kennedy. Jack Kennedy's campaign poster from his 1960 campaign for president. A famous reprint of a very famous 1968 Bobby Kennedy's campaign for the presidency. But the particular poster is for the victory rally at the California Democratic primary at the Ambassador Hotel, which for those people who know a lot about Bobby Kennedy knows is the place in which he's assassinated. And then there was Richard Nixon. And I thought, well, I'm not going to, I can't, if I'm going to spend $20 on the first two, I'll spend $25 and buy the three. Because it's there, where else are you going to get across a Richard Nixon poster?
Oh, okay.
So I bought it. And then I got it mounted and I put it up because I thought it was pretty funny to have the sort of the light and the dark next to each other as well. And then now as a result, because I've had a few photos done in the office with Richard Nixon in the background, everyone thinks I'm this Richard Nixon fan.
Oh,
okay. And it's like, don't get me wrong, he's a fascinating guy.
I got in trouble for having a Ho Chi Minh poster in my office when I first got into Parliament, and I liked it because I bought it in overseas, but I liked it for the graphic art.
Yeah.
And then I realised it was attached to a pretty strong ideology and was probably sending the wrong message to people about who I was.
Well, I have a similar story, like because I had the opportunity again to visit Prague, and I was walking through a Prague market, and I saw a lot of 1950s Czech Republic or Soviet Czech Republic or Soviet Union propaganda.
It's fantastic.
And so I bought it. And so I've got it at my home. I've got these two posters which are from that era because they are actually quite graphically interesting.
They are amazing.
Yeah. And so the one I have is this of this worker with a pickaxe taking off the head of a snake that has written on it capitalist. And I got the whole thing translated, and it translates to from the Czech language. It translates to cut off the capitalist head wherever you see it. And it's like, well, we get raised in a Western tradition. You often saw the anti-communist aspects. There you have it. Didn't put that in my office though.
So you've managed to you're blending those values of social justice with economic literacy. I suppose that really is a less antithetical to the business, and I think that really is the tradition that came out of Hawke and Keating, wasn't it? The Accord, bringing labour and business together, and that's been a key part of your value system and where you're how you're headed.
Yeah, but it also comes from the time I spent with the TWU as well, right? Which is you gotta get systems in balance is the way I'd like to think of it. And like one thing I learned from the TWU as well is that you have to bargain hard, but you also have to respect the fact that people need jobs. And the best sort of industries and the best sort of way in which you can actually bring people together is so long as there's fairness. And I mean, a good example, right? Like working with truck drivers, they're pragmatic, they want outcomes, but they want respect and they want dignity. And how you merge the two of them is sort of writ large is obviously a big challenge for me as treasurer, but that's where I get the value set. And I've sort of seen what happens when people, industry and workers clash. I've also seen what happens when industry and workers collaborate and transform. And often you have to do the two at the same time. And so I'm kind of, I guess, quite comfortable with the dualism that's required as well, which frankly, the Labor Party, because we're a party that's come from the trade union movement predominantly, is a big part of our tradition and one of the very big traditions that sort of defines our ethos. Quite different perhaps to your party, because it's come out of a different type of social movement as well. But you learn that creed about the need to balance conflict with progress all the time.
You mentioned that a key part in your inaugural speech, compromise is the art of politics. You're not going to get everything that you want all the time, and that's a key part of it.
But that's because, I mean, in that particular speech, I spoke a lot about the organising tradition, and that's how I thought a lot about how do you get change and how does change happen. And change does happen through friction, and it does happen through tension that needs to be developed and built, but it also has to be resolved. And actually, I spent a lot of time, particularly when I was on the backbench, reading an incredible amount about very, very different types of social movements, civil rights, Cesar Chavez, and the farm workers movement, all of them, and the Gandhian tradition, incidentally, coming from India, like a lot of time thinking through that. And what you learn very quickly is that it is a responsible ability of people who want to do change to increase tension, so long as they resolve it. And this is something which, incidentally, Dr. King, in his very famous letter from a Birmingham jail, talks a lot about. Right? He writes about the fact that I'm here to expose injustice. That by itself is going to create tension, but we want it resolved. And that's the sort of creed which I anchors the way I often do think about how we get progress done.
And that is the tradition, I think, of people in the centre of politics.
Yeah.
Their job is to recognise the tension. There's a lot of people at the other ends of the spectrum, the left and right, who create a lot of tension.
Yeah.
They're not interested in resolving it.
Yeah, and they profit from it.
They profit from it, exactly.
And they mine it. You can mine political energy to stoke division, or you can mine political energy to get resolution. And it requires a fine sense of balance and a fine sense of judgment as to how you do that.
2015, I remember you coming into the New South Wales upper house.
I had a crack at you too early on. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And you took my head off, put me in my place.
Mate, But you were the first Indian man of
Australian,
Australian Indian elected to a parliament.
I was, yeah.
You're clearly not going to be you're not the last. The first is a really historic moment in Australian politics. The first to swear your oath on the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes.
Which is again another first.
Yes.
And straight away, and I think there's some lessons for your government now. You got to work as a very busy backbencher, but very quickly becoming a shadow Parley Sec, and then shadow
Minister a couple of years later,
a shadow minister, using the powers of the Legislative Council to pull the wings off a government.
Yeah,
Really, because you were very, very effective using the committees, the questions of Parliament, the powers of the questions in Parliament, the standing orders to raise issues, to generate public interest in key matters.
Well, I did my job, I guess, is the way you put it. But Jeremy, you'd remember that parliament that you and I both sat in, right, from 2015 to 2019, in which because the balance of power belonged to Fred Nile, the House didn't do much.
No.
It was pretty dormant, certainly by now, by comparative standards to how it is today.
It's a completely different world.
Completely different, right? Like, I remember when I first got there, you'd have 3 days of business a week when Parliament was sitting. 2 of it was for the government, 1 of it was for private members. But the private members' day was just simply a 10 to 4. And I'm fairly positive we used to every week, or at least every fortnight, make sure we all agree that the Bible is still a good book. Like, that was the type of debate we were having. And that's a good, important debate, don't get me wrong, right? But it wasn't much to do. But in that period of time, you have to learn, you have to listen, you have to things. But when 2019 took place and the upper house balance of power shifted a bit, and we got the opportunity to really think through what would a House review actually be effective at doing. And we did totally revamp the estimate system, which is a very important part of how people get asked questions. And I got to say, as a treasurer who now rocks up to estimates every now and then, I kind of think, what did we do? And so maybe we went too far. But no, but then also, you're quite right. Parliament has a lot of immense power. It has the power, for example, as we've learnt this week, to order people's arrest. It's got the power to compel governments to rock up with documents. It's got the power to ask questions. It's got the power to both enable and block reform if it so chooses. And so from my perspective, I kind of found myself in an interesting position, but frankly, I did use it to see what was going on with the workers' compensation system at that time. And now, incidentally, as treasurer, I'm having to try to reform it, fix it. I used it to figure out what was going on with some of the scandals of the day, particularly some really complex accounting scandals, which I'm definitely, I got to say, for an In the Weeds podcast, I don't want to go in the weeds on that level. I'll bore your people to shit, let's be frank. And then the other part that I did obviously do was when the previous government made John Barilaro the New York Trade Commissioner. I obviously got into that. But it became quite an important chamber.
The gig economy, though.
The gig economy,
the gig economy. That was something I think you should be really proud of, raising the fact that there's legitimate work, that it was unsafe, that there was people being exploited in that area. My son's an Uber Eats a rider right now out there.
You're quite right, Jeremy.
Putting himself through uni.
A lot of the stuff that gets focused is the stuff that when you're trying to, frankly, fight a government. But actually what we did, which I think you're following, an example is we used the upper house to go, here's a big challenge that no one's looked at. How do we use this as a platform to develop ideas, build consensus, but also to build reform? And I did set up the first inquiry in the world at a parliamentary level into the gig economy. And
when you did it, people didn't know what the gig economy was.
Yeah, and then we used that to, for example, show what was happening on Sydney streets, right? And again with the TWU. But we were showing the fact that there were people who were being killed, literally killed, on the streets of Sydney that had no rights, no protection, be it under workplace health and safety law, under industrial relations law, let alone workers' compensation. And I remember sitting down, right, at that inquiry. We started the inquiry before those deaths happened. And those deaths then happened. There were 6 of them in like a span of 2 months or 3 months. And I remember sitting with the widow of one of the riders who lost his life, actually close to where we live, Sydenham in Sydney. And she was a person from China. Her husband, she lived in China. She was raising their children in China and looking after their parents on both sides, her and her husband. Her husband died here. And she was telling me how, through a translator, that she had to, from China, deal with Uber's insurer who was from Europe. And she's on the phone trying to get even the most basic of benefit. And this all happened for a person who died on our streets. And it was that type of storytelling is how we use that forum. And as a result of that, I'm particularly proud of that one because we exposed it in opposition, but then acted on it in government. And a lot of the reforms we've implemented for the gig economy since the Minns government was formed and I became treasurer and Sophie Kotsis became the Industrial Relations Minister was all plotted through that inquiry.
Another one is out-of-home care, which was an inquiry you were part of. So 2023, Labor gets into government, a minority government, but you are shadow treasurer and then you are now the treasurer of New South Wales. Nothing happens in a vacuum. The political and economic context you come into, describe that. A massive amount of debt, huge, gigantic, transformative infrastructure and energy projects. It's an incredible burden.
Yeah, it's pretty intimidating, right? Like you go from being in opposition, in which I had one person who I worked with in my office. That was it. It was just me and one staff member. And we worked together for 2 years, 3 years. Prior to that, I had one staff member. That's all you have. And then the very next thing, you're sworn in as treasurer, and then the Secretary of Treasury is coming to say hi. You've got a department of 600 people. The way I liken it is you're going from being the member of a guerrilla army to in charge, and it's hard. Like you're not used to dealing with that scale. It's been a while since you've been managing that many people, so it's intimidating. Just the very act of becoming treasurer. And I mean, I was 40 when we won the election, and so that's when you were sworn in. And then I remember getting the book. The incoming brief, which I still can't talk to you all about what was in it, but there was an incoming brief that they give you. You have to wait until you're sworn in before they'll give you the password to open it. And then you open it up, and my incoming brief was about 80 pages. And what it tells you, for example, is stuff which people do know, right? Like, which is one, the economy is quite challenged. At that time I became treasurer, inflation was at 7.8%.
Wow.
The highest it had been since the late 70s. And that's a big deal. It means that the prices are growing 3 times faster than everyone's wages, which is why so many people felt a lot of cost of hip pocket pressures as well. They then tell you, by the way, there's about $8 billion worth of programs that are not funded, and including all of, for example, cybersecurity in New South Wales was going to disappear, and then in 12 months' time, 1,200 nurses were going to lose their job. Because they're not funded. They also tell you that you're on set to inherit about $188 billion worth of debt. And by the way, all of it's going to cost you a lot more.
How much again?
$188 billion worth of debt.
That's a lot of debt. That's a record amount of debt. That's the most debt that any
incoming government's gone. And you're going to plot it out. And then on top of that, when I first got sworn in...
And your budget is, what is the budget? I think it's about 130 bill, isn't it? Like annual...
Annual budget on the recurrent side is about 125 this year. Yeah, about 125 billion, but it rises, right? And it goes up just in terms of that. So these are big calls. And just another way of putting it into perspective is the New South Wales government is directly responsible for spending 10% of the New South Wales economy. And so 1 out of every $10 that's spent in New South Wales is spent by the New South Wales government. And
if you're spending a lot of money, like on the one, you're adding to inflation, you've really got to balance. There's about 10,000 things to consider. Do you ever is it like a beautiful mind, mate? Like, can you close your eyes? Do you see it like as a machine? Is it numbers moving? Like, how do you just have to compartmentalize each bit and understand each bit and try and work out how they all fit together?
Well, I'll leave it for others to judge how well I'm doing, but basically, you have to know your stuff. You've got to be across the detail. There's no shortcuts, that's for sure. But I did spend 2 years as Shadow Treasurer, and I spent a lot of time asking public service questions when I was in opposition. So, like any job, right? Like, you're only as good at for it to the extent to which you prepare for it.
Victory loves preparation.
Yeah.
The maxim of the
But
Roman legions.
But tell me, there's a learning curve, and I got to tell you, like, you know, getting into the intricacies of how government accounting works is a hard issue to deal with. Like, there's a big knowledge gap. But yeah, at its core, you can either make it really complex or you can make it really simple. And the way in which I've approached it is that I think it was that famous line from Wizard of Oz, right? Any road, or Lewis Carroll, was it? Any road will take you there if you don't know where you're going, and you need to know where you actually want to go.
Wow.
And
yep.
And if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, right? Like, and so from our perspective, it's always been, well, where do we want to be? What's the strategy? What's our job here? And then backward solve for that as well. And we decided very early on that we firstly had to bring inflation down. We had to do our bit to bring inflation down, because if we didn't, interest rates would stay higher, and that would crush a lot of families. Secondly, we've got to get going on the housing crisis. 3, we've got to build essential services, which means we need to work with our workforce and do some really hard conversations about bargaining, pay them more, but get better public services.
Bring back the independent umpire so you can do that.
Yeah,
so there's
all
the
that.
IRC's brought, the Industrial Relations Commission has brought back.
Get all that reform underway, and at the same time deal with the very complex financial challenges that the state of New South Wales was facing, and what we inherited from the Liberal Party.
And also, I suppose, maximise the benefit, make sure that we maximise the benefit of this renewable energy rollout, and get that going, and also of the transformative metro projects.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Jeremy. And this is the point you make often in the House too, right? Which is the future. What is the future going to look like, and how's it going to be different? And you've just identified 2. And the first one you mentioned there is really important. Yeah, the future is going to look a lot more like renewable energy. Where's that up to? It's a big job to get that done. A lot of the nation's economic fate will turn on how well we do it. We've got to get on it, you know. And I know you've had Penny Sharp on this program before, I think, and she would have spoken to you about that. But it's a hard challenge as well. We've got 4 coal-fired power stations that are due to turn off in the next 10 years. Yeah, and they need to be replaced. You can fight about what needs to replace them with. People have, but I think people have now voted many, many times. They want that to be renewable energy.
They certainly have. Like, if you have a look at those coal-fired power stations from, 2 kilometres away, they look great. But the closer you get to them, I don't know if you ever toured one, they are like, I remember going to Liddell and going, oh my God, this thing. And they were saying it's an explosion risk. These things were built in the 80s.
Late 70s.
Late 70s and 80s, and they were falling apart. And so we were going to have to replace them with something anyway. But that renewable energy rollout is happening. Huge tasks, tens of billions of dollars of public money and private money rolling out there. More recently, you and Jim Chalmers have been talking about abundance.
Yes.
The Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson.
Yeah, it's a great book.
It is a great book.
Yeah.
I did myself a favour.
And you read it?
And I'm about halfway through it at the moment. It's a really interesting book in that it really says, I think, essentially that it's very optimistic.
Yeah.
That we've got this great big planet.
And it's ambitious.
It's ambitious, but we really need to get going on the solutions, reduce the regulatory burden in some parts, and really embrace productivity.
Yeah.
And productivity really is about change, isn't it?
It is. And look, I strongly recommend that your listeners and your viewers get the book. It's a really good book.
It is a good book.
And it's a provocative book for if you happen to be a person who's a progressive. Because the core argument that they're making is that if you want to solve a climate crisis, if you want to solve a housing crisis, if you want more equality, then you need to recognise that we need more power, more homes. And what stops us from getting more power and more homes is our own red tape. And we tend to trip over our own red tape. And when we say the we in that, the argument they're making is that centre-left progressive governments have so saddled themselves in these type of red tape that it's stopping us from achieving our own goals.
Yeah.
And
it's an incredibly powerful argument. I think it's true.
Yeah.
As someone who's come from the left, I recognise that as a criticism of, like I think I've moved sort of from the left more to the centre as I've gotten older and I think more politically mature. But I think it is absolutely true that we've encumbered ourselves unnecessarily in a lot, especially in the area of planning.
Yeah, and so the irony is that when you have, for example, environmental law being used to block homes from being built, which happens in New South Wales and it happens in California, which they very famously talk about in that book, what happens is you end up locking out middle class and working class people from cities. And you can create cities and regions as great areas of prosperity, but if no one can live in them, what's the point? And if they're not engines of social mobility, that's a problem. And I think about that from my own personal experience. The part of the reasons why I was able to do what I could do was because my mum could afford a home on the wage of an accounts clerk. I'm not sure that's still the case. And that's why we say we need to build more homes. And that's why we as a government have been making the case since we got here that if you want to hold on to a middle class, if you want working people to be able to live close to where they work, you need more homes.
And if you want to perpetuate humanity, the argument I have, like people who buy a home overwhelmingly are people who are having family, having children, procreating and building the next generation, which we have to make sure we keep doing. And I think a collapse of our population and our fertility rates is the outcome of this, of this regulatory and economic burden that we're encumbered with.
But by the same token, if you want to stop the climate crisis, you need to build clean power. And
quickly.
And this is the issue, right? And then all of a sudden you have environmental law being used to block things like wind farms.
We see the gnats and the greens sort of teaming up to this whole transmission
100%.
line.
That's what astonished me with the start of this particular parliament was that very early weird collaboration between the Greens and the Nats to block underground transmission lines and block them.
Yeah.
Which at the same time we need to connect that green clean power that's cheap to the grid. And this is the point that both Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson are making, which is if you keep doing that, just don't expect then to solve a housing crisis, a climate crisis, and at the same time get the new technology built as well, which is the other part of the book, which is we've made it harder to invent new technology and slowed it down quite a bit. And so that's the second half of the book, which you'll enjoy.
Which is, we need to have a productive economy, which means the private sector, and a lot in the left think it's just going to be up to the government. We need the government intervening to underwrite some of, our of the necessities of life, like health, education, transport, the rest. But in other areas, we really need to get out of the way of the private sector to allow capital to flow, people to be productive, so that they can innovate. And there's an interesting line in your budget, and it said, "Look, there's some headwinds that we're dealing with," and it says that look, productivity is the key. Our productivity rate in New South Wales is quite low. I think it's sitting at about 0.4.
It's low. We expect it to be about 1%. And just what that means for people is, productivity is how much do you get out for what you put in? And the more you get out from what you get in, the more wealth you have. So if I could get you to me, we work together and we can produce 3 podcasts an hour rather than 2 podcasts an hour, we share the benefit of the extra podcast, right? The problem we have in New South Wales is that, we are still getting growth. Don't get me wrong. We're still getting it, but we're not getting it as fast as we used to. And if you went back to 2004, for example, when I was finishing university, and I don't know what you were doing. I presume you were cutting some stone.
I was a stonemason,
Yeah. So at that point in time, generally we would get productivity growth of a roughly 1.5% to 2%. 10 years later, when I was first in Parliament and you were in Parliament, we were getting roughly 1 to 1.5. After COVID, where we are now, we're expecting to be getting about 1. And as that goes down, we're not creating the extra resources that we can then use to pay people more. We could then use so businesses get a better return, so we get better taxes.
To invest in new technologies.
And that's the issue, right? And so what I've been talking about in this budget is that we do need to get the private sector to build and to build and to build. Because if they're putting in more technology, they're putting more tools, our workers have better tools with which to work, which means we get more for what we get out, and we have to get those settings right. And that's not going to be an easy thing to solve.
It
we have
isn't.
to keep trying.
And I'm glad you're in the job, mate, because I think one of the great settings, and it's in your budget, it says in the absence, productivity will be hard to move in the absence, I think the word you use, in the absence of a great technological innovation. But we have AI.
Yeah.
And AI coming down range, and I know you did an inquiry into automation.
Yep.
Its impacts
Yep.
in terms of workforce. And it's AI's, as we speak, transforming everything. This technology here we're using right now is relying on AI. Government agencies are relying on it more. The private sector is using AI. With that, there's going to be a huge transformation, but we need to make sure that people don't lose their jobs, that we don't end up with a hope of people wondering what happens next. The private sector especially rationalising, using this technology for efficiency. We need to sort of grasp the nettle, bring people along and make sure we transform that area. So the technology is there. Are we well placed to manage the transition and benefit from it?
We've got a lot of work to do to get to adapt our institutions so that is possible, and modernising our institutions so that's possible. But the very first point I'd say, Jeremy, is that you're right. We did an inquiry on automation, would have finished around 2022. It's out of date. It's already out of date.
Already out of date,
It's
I know.
already out of date, because all what happened since then was the world saw ChatGPT at the end of that year or the start of the following, or in that year the following, totally out of date. And you can see already how fast now the world is changing. And I'll take one step back to go back to the earlier point you made about the need for the government to work with the private sector as well, right? Put it this way: the New South Wales government is Australia's biggest state government. Our total capital spend in 1 year is 30 billion, roughly this year. It's about 30 billion, and that's for all the water, all the houses, all the schools, all the hospitals, all the metros, all the roads, all the disaster recovery we're all doing, just as a government. Companies like Amazon will spend 30 billion in a quarter, relatively comfortable on their capital program. Whether that's a good thing or is a bad thing is a different debate. Whether it's good to have entities that big who can have that level of spending power, interesting question. Increasingly interesting question on all sides of politics,
especially with AI. When you see corporations having a massive advantage over states like China
and I'm making
India.
This point, right, because what you're seeing is the formation of this powerful technology, but alongside these questions as to who controls it and for what purpose, and who benefits from it. And that's a debate that we have to have here in New South Wales. It's a debate we have to have across the world and in the nation. And I'm glad that we are having that debate now.
Because you think about, would you privatise nuclear power? Nuclear warheads in the 1950s, all of a sudden, look, the private sector's going to do that. They'll run with the power, and there are parallels in terms of the implications, the potential, the good and bad of that. You certainly want the state involved, regulated,
100%,
and
my attitude to this, right, which is sort of my attitude in general as a centre-left politician, right, which is we have to apply our principles to a world that is changing. That doesn't mean necessarily holding on to the means rather than the ends, right? Concentrate a bit more on the ends, be a bit more flexible about the means. But this question around AI is raising so many fascinating questions. But the one that my general approach to it is that my own attitude is that it will only work if the benefits are for the many, not the few. And if we create a set of policy settings so the benefits are for the many and not the few, then its social license will be bigger. But if it we simply see the emergence of monopoly that captures and hoards a lot of that benefit for the few and not the many, then don't be surprised if that does raise other questions for government to have to respond to about how we tax and how we regulate labour relations. And these are the questions that we as a parliament need to grapple with and we as a state need to. And I know you did a lot of work on this when you led the AI inquiry.
Yeah.
But we have to have that question, right? Who wins and who loses from it? And how do we make sure that it can be a win-win solution?
And we're seeing it with the social media ban, or for a lot of this is you're trying to regulate, but it's not like you're regulating the internet. You're regulating companies that exist, in California or DC. It is actually up for our state, our nation to resolve, because the implications are absolutely massive and have to engage. I can't let you go, mate, without at least getting your take on the federal election.
Yeah.
What happened in your take? Like, what went so wrong for Dutton? Why do you think Albo had just a historic win?
Well, I think that Albo and the federal Labor government did two things really well. The first is that they showed everybody that they were a collegiate, collective, disciplined government.
It looked like a pretty solid ministry and cabinet.
Yeah, at a time where people do put a premium on predictability and stability. The second thing is that they paired it with a good vision of what the future looks like. More investment in Medicare, more investments in your local schools, more investments in your local hospitals. And I think they met the nation where it's moved where it is. And I think great credit to them as well. And the final point, I think, is that what federal Labor did very well was make it clear that, frankly, that they were the only party that was prepared to govern for everybody. There's this old adage that generally voters choose their politicians. I think some of what the mistake that the Liberals made and the Greens made was that politicians started to choose their voters. That is, they said there were some voters that were more important than others, and that there were some voters that they weren't prepared to represent. And if you were talking about the Liberal Party basically said that if you happen to play about climate change, we don't care. We're not the party for you. But by the same tokens, if you go to the other side of the extreme, which is the Greens Party, when they're saying that if you happen to care about your jobs or at a time of great change, we're not the party for you, don't be surprised if people go, no. I think what Labor has done very well is make it clear that they're a party federally that has a vision for the future, they have people to implement it, and they respect those who agree with them and those who disagree with them. I got to say, as a person who both agrees and has at times disagree with them, that's a good attitude to have and a very mature attitude to have from the federal government.
It is. I concur. And in terms of what you see in the future for New South Wales, what are the big challenges you see in terms of the next 4 or 5 years that you're going to have to deal with?
We've got to make sure there's more homes for people to build. We've got to make sure there's more homes for people to buy and for people to rent. We've got to make sure that everybody has a good school and a good hospital close to where they live. We've got to make sure that everyone has got good access to public transport.
And I mean, I went out to Riverstone recently, and I just saw that. I went, oh wow, there are huge suburbs out there with no buses, with roads that are like the infrastructure is a long way behind.
Yeah.
And I think your budget was described as the poles,
pipes and poles.
Pipes and poles. It really is a bit of a catch-up budget, isn't it?
Well, I got to say, I mean, Riverstone's a good example of that, where that is a part of Sydney that's done so much to help us build homes for people, but they have every right to say, well, where's our roads? Where's the pipes? Where's the poles? Where's the pavements? And I remember Gough Whitlam.
I mean, there's more people in Riverstone than in Tasmania, just about.
I remember Gough Whitlam getting mocked for wanting to sewer the suburbs. But if you happen to have sewerage, it really matters.
It matters.
Yeah, it matters a great deal. So,
and if you've got some road that was built in 1850, it was a goat track that's 2 lanes and
doesn't work.
Matters
a great deal.
It matters a great deal.
Yeah.
So,
but that's why we're very, very proud to sort of say that we have a real neighbourhood level focus when it comes to spending infrastructure dollars. Final point to answer your question about where I want for the next 4 years. I'm a Labor treasurer. I want people in jobs and I want their wages to go up. Yeah, and I want that to be sustainable. I don't want it to just be boom and bust in terms of is your wage going up, but then we have an inflation crisis, so you lose all the purchasing power anyway. So that's where I think the challenges are the state. But Jeremy, I'm optimistic, and I'm from where the states are. I think that New South Wales has come through 5 very difficult years with a global pandemic and a big cost of living shock that came after it. And I think the next 5 years is an opportunity for us to be optimistic and ambitious about the future, but we have to all come together to meet some of the challenges we're dealing with.
Fantastic. Well, I'm an optimist too, mate. There's no other choice. Why would you be anything but? I really appreciate the work you're doing, mate. I really appreciate the dedication and the thought you've put into an incredibly complex task, running one of the biggest economies in the world. You're really, I think, a quintessential Australian success story.
Oh, thank you.
You very much appreciate you and the work you're doing, and for coming on Into the Weeds to have a chat about New South Wales and how you count all the beans.
Thank you, Jeremy, and congratulations on this very fine forum.
Thanks, mate. Good on you.
See you, mate.